It just seems to me that while many of us don't see Pierre Poilievre as the most sincere guy in the world, this week he didn't help himself. What did he do and what didn't he do?
Well, he was making a big deal for days about having a non-confidence vote. So that means he wanted to defeat the government. And like this is those one of those Shakespearean moments, right? If you take a shot at the king, make sure you kill him. So all of us thought, okay, well, maybe he knows something. Maybe the NDP's on side and opposing the carbon tax, because that was the subject matter of the non-confidence vote. It's like, wow, and newsrooms across the country are like, something's going on Thursday. This is going to be big. And he lost the vote. And not only did he lose the vote, he didn't even show up for the final fucking vote. Pierre Poilievre, he was at a fundraiser in Toronto. And so some Tories are not many, but some Tories are running around this morning and say, oh, we achieved a victory. We tagged the NDP in the block with the carbon tax. It's like, no shit, Sherlock. Like, they were already supporting the carbon tax. How was that an achievement? So the headline everywhere this morning is Pierre Poilievre lost his non-confidence vote. I do not understand how this was good strategy, because everybody's kind of scratching their head this morning saying, why did he do that? Like, why did he waste all that time on something where the outcome was already known?
So, over the years, when you were a chief of staff for cabinet ministers and for Jean Chrétien himself, you must have done the odd confidence vote, engineered the odd non-confidence vote in the Conservative government. Do you recall a single time when your own leader, Jean Chrétien, would not have been there for a confidence vote?
No, no. And, sometimes you do things, as I think you're implying, for performative reasons. So in 93, Kim Campbell had become leader of the Conservative Party. She was very popular that summer, as you will recall. And I was looking for ways to tag her. I was running Chrétien's war room, and our kind of spiritual boss was the amazing Romeo LeBlanc. So I said to Romeo, let's ask her if she stands by the decision to purchase the EH-101 helicopters. Let's ask her over and over in the House. And Romeo said to me, well, why would we do that? We already know she's standing by it. She was Minister of National Defense who oversaw the procurement. And I said, I need the footage for ads of her standing up and voting for these stupid helicopters. And he's like, okay. So we had a Lloyd Axworthy and Brian Tobin, and they're all standing up over and over asking her. You can see she was just getting frustrated. Of course, I stand by this purchase, and it's a good thing, and we believe in, Tories standing, all the Tories standing up. It was beautiful, giving her a standing ovation, applauding. And I was like, thank you, Jesus. That's what I want. Right. And they fell into our trap. So, I thought that's what the Tories were doing last night with this vote on the carbon tax. And, I know they've got this fetish about the carbon tax, and, fill your boots. But what did they achieve? They lost the vote. Everybody already knew the Bloc and the NDP supported a carbon tax, as I mentioned. It just made no sense. So that was an attempt, I think, at performative politics that blew up in their faces.
So does it help them to have a videotape of Liberals in the NDP and the Bloc standing up for the carbon tax? I mean, I'm asking whether what you did to Kim Campbell, is it possible they did the same and were doing it for the same reasons, not to win the vote, but simply to get tape for an ad?
Maybe, but the markets in which it would work, there are markets where the Liberals don't factor. It's a Tory NDP race, as you know, and that used to be parts of Manitoba. It's still some parts of Saskatchewan, certainly parts of the Lower Mainland, but not enough to expend all of these resources and all this rhetoric on a vote that you're going to lose. It just doesn't make sense, because there was already lots of evidence that a war room could use that the NDP was foursquare in support of a carbon tax, and so was the Bloc. So like I say, those moments are useful, but I think the carbon tax, if it had been something else, maybe, the Online Harms Act or whatever, but it just didn't make sense to me to spend all that time proving something we already knew.
So, Warren, help me with this because you don't live that far from 905. So, I want to ask you for the people who live in the parts of 905 that really don't give a hoot whether liberals or conservatives are in power. They're not really highly connected to either the so-called swing ridings, and I'm speaking specifically of the Mississaugas, the ridings just west of Toronto, all the way down to Hamilton. Um, Many people who live in those ridings now commute. Many of the people who live in those ridings don't have cars. Many of them, sorry to say, because of affordability being what it is in Canada, cannot afford cars. Isn't it fair to conclude that many of those people are making money, if you will, on the carbon tax because they're getting rebates, and they're not pumping very much gas? So is the anti-carbon tax thing, which is huge in the part of the country I live in, Western Canada? You mentioned Manitoba, Saskatchewan earlier. Is it possible that in those parts of all important battleground 905 Ontario, the Poilievre carbon tax is not the devil that it is in the West?
Well, it's not like where I am here. And by the way, take a look here. See these suitcases? This is
Yeah,
from me
yeah,
driving all night to get ahead of the
yeah.
snowmageddon that was going to hit the 905 and the 416. So go to hell, snowstorm. So I got home. Um, so around here where I live in rural Canada, it's not popular either among people who work in the wine and the agricultural industries. They need it like a hole in the head. But people are conflicted on this, as you and I have talked about before. If you say to them, still, Charles Adler, do you support penalizing with money people who pollute? 100% of you are going to say yes. Yes. That's why Trudeau did what he did. He gave it the wrong name. He shouldn't have called it a carbon tax. He should call it a price on pollution or a tax on pollution. But if you say to them, the second question is, Charles, do you mind paying personally for the polluting you do? Charles's answer is going to be, I don't pollute, and no, I shouldn't have to pay for it. It should be Domtar or one of those guys. It shouldn't be me. So that was the problem always with the carbon tax. I think Trudeau feels like he's playing rope-a-dope. People are now getting their rebates, and they're going to be mad at Poilievre that it's being taken away. Like, going back to Ralph Klein doing this, you'll get leaders who will do these little checks in the mail and say, this is happening because of X policy. My experience is generally they don't work. When I worked for Chrétien, we would talk about these things and he'd shrug and he'd say, people think it's not very much money. It really doesn't add up to be a lot. So they're generally not motivated by it. So and then Poilievre, if he becomes prime minister, he'll come up with some check of his own. Here's your rebate for, voting Tory, whatever it is. So I think that I understand what Trudeau's doing. I'm just not sure it's going to work.
Yeah, I just thought that for the massive amounts of people who can't afford cars or don't drive very much in 905, they might see the rebates as net positive for them, and they might not like the idea of someone taking the checks away from them. Want to move on to something completely different, and it's the ceasefire that the Americans now seem to be supporting in Israel Hamas warfare. The ceasefire that they're supporting would be tied to the release of hostages, unlike the ceasefires proposed by some people in this country, including the NDP. What do you make of the latest American scenario and its chances of any success?
I think it's to apply pressure on Netanyahu. Netanyahu is not a favorite of the Biden administration. He's seen as having gone rogue. He's seen as not having listened to them. And, let's face it, militarily, Israel is hooped. I think they could go a week or two without the support of the Americans, and then they would be in some big trouble. So while everybody wants to see Hamas wiped out, including the Saudis and the UAE and the Egyptians and so on, everybody wants Hamas wiped out because they're not just a problem for Israel, they're a problem for the region. But, I think the view is in the Biden administration, look, Bibi, as they call him, you told all the Palestinians to go to Rafah to get away from the bombs. Now you're saying you're going to have a ground incursion into Rafah where there's 4 million people. it doesn't work. Can you please stop doing that? He told them to go pound sand, and they said, okay. So I think this is to apply pressure on Netanyahu and to adopt a different tactic to that last remaining element of Hamas. You know, they had 22 battalions of about 1,500 monsters in each one. They're down to about 3 or 4. So it's almost over, right? Wiping them out militarily. And I think the Americans are saying you can't do that in Rafah because there's just too many people there and we can't get them out in time.
Well, the other problem is pictures. You're a person of pictures. That's what you've done your entire career, is found ways to illustrate the frailties and the weaknesses of your enemies. And it can't possibly be good for Netanyahu, and it can't possibly be good for Israel to have pictures of what appear to be famine. Famine is always man-made in the Middle East, and we're talking about famine in Gaza. There's no way that's good for Israel, and no way it's good for Netanyahu, and certainly no way that's good for Joe Biden's administration.
And I think the factor that a lot of North Americans aren't aware of, and I've talked to enough hostage families and Israelis, the most powerful force in Israeli politics is not Benjamin Netanyahu. It's the hostage families. They really drive the political agenda now in Israel. Everybody knows who they are. Everybody listens to them because of the hell on earth that they are experiencing. You know, a story came out last night. The IDF is now calculating that all of the, couple dozen Israeli women, young women who are still hostages, they're calculating that all of them are pregnant. They've been repeatedly violated by Hamas monsters, and they're all pregnant. So, because they've been there for 5 months. So I think the force that Netanyahu cannot ignore is the hostage families. And the hostage families are saying, if you make a big mistake in Gaza, the people who are going to pay a price are our family members. This is why, remember initially he was talking about flooding the tunnels, and superficially it didn't sound like a bad idea, right? Just, flush out the tunnels so they can't use them anymore. Take seawater and pump it in there. And the hostage family said no, because if you do that, you're going to kill our family members too. So they had to back away. So I think, what I always do when I'm looking at where public opinion is going in Israel, I look to the hostage families. They are really driving the agenda in a way that no other politician is in Israel.
But one of the things that's driving what I'll have to call the anti-Israel agenda, or certainly questioning the Netanyahu government, is the idea of famine. As I said earlier, I mean, I can go back into, We Are the World and the various events that took place over the years to deal with the man-made famine in Ethiopia and elsewhere. And it's just not something that Netanyahu can make excuses for. He can say that there are remnants of Hamas that are raiding some of the food trucks. But the fact is there aren't nearly enough food trucks being allowed in, and the world is ready to supply food. I'm talking about the Americans and other countries ready to supply food. This one, unfortunately, is on Netanyahu, and because it's on Netanyahu,
no, I disagree.
It is on Israel. Would you disagree with that?
Partly, I do. No, but I've seen the footage. You talked about pictures off the top. I've seen footage over and over and over. When you see a multiplicity of it, I always encourage people in the days of, this is the days of deep fakes. It's easy for people to manipulate images. So people should not believe images that they see all the time. The one thing I've seen over and over and over, and so is everybody else, is Hamas terrorists hijacking those aid trucks. I've seen Hamas terrorists selling stamped aid packages in markets in Gaza. So it's not just Israel to blame here for hunger growing in Gaza. It's Hamas. They are selling aid that should not be sold. It should be given to the people, the innocent civilians. But, what I hold out hope is this enormous pier that the Americans are talking about building to deliver aid. They say that they think that they can have that in place by April, which is an incredible military engineering feat if true. And then I think that would make a big difference, because Israel, nobody can mess with that. If the Americans have a physical presence there to deliver aid, nobody's going to fuck with them, right? The reason why Hezbollah, the reason why it just finished, the pier that they're going to build out into the
pier so they can deliver food by sea.
Yeah.
But yeah,
because there isn't one now. There isn't one.
I don't want to argue with you here because obviously Hamas is culpable for everything. They lit the rocket that created this. But the point is that when you're in a war zone, and for the most part you're controlling the war zone, the responsibility for famine is yours, despite the fact that you've got looters and terrorists that are obviously trying to affect things. You still get internationally, because you're in charge of the zone, you're the one that bears the responsibility for something like starvation. So let me move on to something a little bit different. There was a resolution earlier this week made by the NDP, and the resolution involved the words, and correct me if I'm wrong, Warren Kinsella, recognizing the Palestinian state. What was that about? Because there is no Palestinian state. So when the NDP said they wanted to recognize the state, what is it that they're recognizing?
Well, Palestine is not a country in the way that Canada is yet. Obviously, it's subject to a lot of dispute. Palestinians say that about Israel. So what the NDP was doing was a bit of mischief. It was a non-binding resolution. So really it meant that it was meaningless. But I think they were attempting to stir up trouble, maybe throw a bone to their base, which tends to be very anti-Israel and in some cases anti-Semitic. So they said, we're going to use a resolution to say, recognize Palestinian statehood, recognize Palestine as a country. Why is that a problem? Notionally, you go, okay, well, what's the big deal about that? We call them Palestine. They're kind of a country. The problem is it's recognizing Hamas. Since 2007, the entity that has governed Hamas, the government of Gaza, the government of Gaza since 2007 is Hamas. If you recognize Gaza, you hand Hamas an enormous victory, because in effect, you're recognizing them as the government of Gaza. We can't do that. That was problem number one. Problem number two, they had another part of their resolution saying they wanted to stop, Canada will stop sending military support, arms to Israel. And that was stupid too, because the reality is, number one, it hasn't stopped. People like me have gotten in touch with the Department of National Defense, and they've said we've got trade deals with them, and we're going to continue to do it until we're ordered by the government proper. But secondly, Charles, most of the military trade between Canada and Israel is them supplying us. They supply our military. So are we saying now that we don't want to get their technology? Because the Israelis, as you know, are leaders in the world in terms of tech. And it was crazy. It was divisive. It was troublemaking. It made people mad on all sides. The Muslim community is not happy. The Jewish community is not happy. Nobody's happy. It was the NDP trying to stir up shit, and it was mission accomplished. And it just made people even more divided.
It seemed goofy to me. I think most of us support the idea of a so-called two-state solution. We want the Palestinians to have a country. But at the moment, there is no government of the country to be had. And so to recognize the status quo is, I don't know, it felt ridiculous to me to recognize what's going on right now and call it a country or call it a state. Let me move on to politics in the United States. There's not enough polling data for me to determine that Joe Biden is turning it around. So at the moment, Donald Trump is still the favorite. So I've published some pieces about Donald Trump becoming the president again. I would love to be wrong. I know that you believe that I am wrong. What's the evidence that Warren Kinsella has that Joe Biden is turning things around?
Decency. The vast majority of Americans have not lost their minds. The vast majority of Americans are not racist, misogynist jerks. I've lived in the United States, so have you. I've knocked on doors for the Democrats, and I've talked to Republicans too, not just Democrats. And I've done phone banking for the Democrats from California to Maine. Like, at the end of the day, like in Canada, right? You've got 25% hardcore liberal vote. They're always going to vote for liberals. They're always going to vote for Trudeau, who's ever there. You got 25% hardcore Tory vote. And the fight is always for that middle percentage. Same thing in the United States. You've got a hardcore, about 30% Democrat, hardcore, not as much Republicans. And then the fight is for the independents, the people who move around. And the independents have had it with Donald Trump. And what's been interesting in the past few days is, it used to be, certainly before he was nominated or won the nomination, Biden would not even mention Trump's name, wouldn't even mention his name. Now that the battle has been joined, he is mocking Trump every single day, and people are loving it. They're eating it up. And what he's doing, using humor, and Carville taught me, Clinton's guy, if you're going to punch your opponent, always do it with a big smile on your face, right? Big smile on your face. Tell a joke and then beat the shit out of them, right? So that's what I did with Stockwell Day. Held up Barney the dinosaur. It's kind of mean. It was a joke, but it delivered a point. Same thing here. Biden is using humor to knock the stuffing out of Trump. And Trump is back on his heels. He's actually on the ropes right now because he's broke. Donald Trump, the reason why he became so popular with Republicans love rich people, right? They manipulate themselves every night to pictures of rich people. They love rich people. Well, Donald Trump isn't rich. Donald Trump is broke. He needs to come up with $500 million today, or he's going to start having some of his property seized by the Attorney General in New York. So, I think Biden is bringing the fight now to Trump, and people are digging it, and it's getting good coverage, and the needle's starting to move in the polls.
So Joe Biden is telling this joke. I'm not going to repeat the joke, but the joke essentially is about a person who is absolutely flat broke, going to Joe Biden for money. And Joe Biden's punchline is along the lines of, sorry, Donald, can't help you. And he's going around now calling Trump broke Trump. Trump always nicknames his opponents. He's got lots of different nicknames for Joe Biden, revolving around his age, accusing him of dementia and everything else. Joe Biden is now calling Trump broke Trump. And you may be right. The Carville way.
I am right. I know it. I bet everybody, just so everybody knows, Charles, your point of view, all of my friends are saying to me, "Oh, Warren, awfully sorry, Joe's going to lose." And I'm like, no, he's not. He's not going to fucking lose. Fuck you. I bet one of my friends $1,000, Jonathan Ferguson. Fuck you, Jonathan. So I'm going to play this for him. Like, Joe is going to win because that middle constituency, independents, they're going to come back home to Joe.
So it was Carville's famous for the campaign they ran for Clinton against George H.W. Bush and Ross Perot, and it was the economy stupid. It's the economy stupid became the phrase that pays. It's been used millions of times by people all over the world trying to fight and win elections. And I guess right now it's the as far as you're concerned, it's the decency stupid, it's the democracy stupid, it's the threat stupid.
No,
which stupid phrase do you like, Warren?
We, guys like you and me in the media, we always make the mistake of assuming voters make these important decisions on the basis of one issue. And, so we write about the 1988 federal Canadian campaign saying it was all about free trade. It wasn't just about free trade. Joe and Jane Front Porch, they look at a multiplicity of issues, right? Who's going to take the trash away at the end of my driveway? Who's going to make sure healthcare is there for my kid when he or she gets sick? So they look at a bundle of issues. And the thing that I don't think it should make Poilievre nervous because his lead is so enormous right now, but it should make Trump guys a little bit nervous, is the economy in the United States and Canada are improving. You had Tiff Macklem this week, the governor of the Bank of Canada, saying, no, I'm not going to raise rates. And in fact, we're looking at lowering rates. So that'll have a positive effect on people's ability to borrow and spend money and all that kind of stuff. So I still think Poilievre's going to win, but it's not going to be this biggest majority bullshit in Canadian history. That's what Susan Delacourt used to say about Paul Martin, the juggernaut, and how did that one turn out? So, right now he's got a big, big lead and Trudeau's been there too long, but I don't think he's going to get the biggest majority in Canadian history.
So Brian Mulroney had to be nice for you to be, had to die for you to be nice to Brian Mulroney. You were always one of his staunchest opponents for all the self-evident reasons. You were a war room liberal. Does Paul Martin have to pass for Warren Kinsella to say something nice about him? I mean, you've had it in for Paul Martin for some years now, and I see
No, not for him.
the chip
Not
is
for
still on
him.
the shoulder.
No, not for him. It was his
So
people.
even if, let's just put it on the record, even if Paul Martin dies, you will not say nice things?
No, he served his country. He could have gone off and been a billionaire, and he chose public life like his father did, and that takes some guts, and he deserves credit for that. He wasn't doing it to get rich, that's for sure. No, my beef was with the people around him. The people around him were thugs. They were people who destroyed the Liberal Party for a decade. Then they went down to Toronto and they destroyed the Ontario Liberal Party with Kathleen Wynne. They're thugs. And, those are the people I object to. I don't know why Martin listened to them. I think he's now probably realized he shouldn't have. But I take Paul Martin over Pierre Poilievre.
I want to go a little bit deeper into that because we're now talking about character. So please compare the character of Paul Martin to the character of Pierre Poilievre. I find the idea of the comparison fascinating. Once again, please take your time, Warren.
Yeah, well, you're asking me to do. I don't really know either guy very well. I'm like everybody. You kind of try to get to know somebody through the paper, through the media, through watching them on TV mainly, because TV is an emotional medium, and that's where they think it's the most authentic, it's the most genuine way of gauging what someone's soul is like. I find Poilievre way too angry. Like he's just too hot all the time. Like everything is an 11. Like in Spinal Tap, the movie, where the dial goes to 11, he's always 11. And it's like, can you smile a bit? Can you lighten up? Like we got a fucking great country. It's why everybody wants to come here. Martin was not like that. He was not an angry guy all the time. The people around him were. But I was a Chrétien guy, right? I love Chrétien, and he was my boss, and now he's my friend. And if Chrétien told me to kill somebody, I would give it serious thought.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that's going to get clipped now by some Tory war room. Kinsella says he's going to kill us. But he I was a Chrétien guy, and I didn't like the way they conducted themselves. But they paid the price, didn't they? Not Chrétien. Chrétien stayed for longer than he was planning to because they tried to force him out. And then the Martin guys went and proceeded to destroy the Liberal Party of Canada, which they did for a decade.
So what happens when, I'm thinking about the Federal Reserve.
I'm pretty good when I'm exhausted, aren't I? Am I good when I'm exhausted?
Yeah, I was just going to say that what we need to do from now on is deprive you of sleep. What I call the Guantanamo solution. Deprive Kinsella of sleep, and he may say anything. He may even say that he'd murder someone for Jean Chrétien. I'm sure when Chrétien watches this, he'll be happy.
Oh, he'll love it. He'll say, Kinsella, did you say that? I'll say, yes, sir. You say, good.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. All right. In less than 2 minutes here, the Federal Reserve this week, and they are the lead banker of the world, technically the U.S. banker, but we're
going to end on a Federal Reserve question. Okay.
The Federal Reserve says that they expect to cut interest rates, or at least people who follow the Federal Reserve are expecting 3 interest rate cuts this year. So whether the 3 interest rate cuts are done this year, or 2 are done this year and 1 is done next year, there's no way that the Americans are cutting rates where the Canadians aren't cutting rates. And I don't want to get into all the weeds of why that is.
For sure.
So if come election time, come the fall of next year, if the central bank rate in this country is 1 to 2 points lower than it is now, if that's not a game changer, what is?
Well, but like I said a minute ago, obviously you weren't listening to me, Mr. Adler. People don't make these important decisions based upon one issue, right? So, and the big problem Trudeau's got is not the economy, because the economy is actually doing pretty well. We're not doing as well as the Americans, but we're doing okay. Trudeau's big problem is one that he can't control. He can't fix it, which is the widespread impression with men, women, East, West, young, old. It's like, Justin, you've been there too long. I voted for him in 2015, But now it's like almost a decade. It's time for you to move along. That is his biggest problem, not, the economy or the carbon tax or any of that bullshit. He's just been there too long. And that's why I'm saying if he wants to save the Liberal Party of Canada, he has to go. But now he's sitting here watching the Charles Adler podcast saying, if Kinsella says I have to go, I'm going to stay, just to spite him.
So who are you voting for next year? Santa Claus?
The Yogic Flyers. I really like them. I like their platform. Are they still
Warren
around?
Kinsella. Warren Kinsella, thank you very much. I'm Charles
Bye.
Adler. Thank you so much for everything.